Welcome to the SDA Housing Podcast, brought to you by NDIS Property Australia. Before starting this episode, we need to provide a general disclaimer. Information contained in this podcast is general in nature only. It does not take into account the objectives, financial situation, or needs of any particular person. You need to consider your financial situation and needs before making any decisions based on the information in this podcast. And you should consider seeking independent and professional advice for your personal circumstances. All right, let's begin.
Hello everybody, my name is Min and I'm your co-host with Debbie from our office here, and you're listening to the SDA Housing Podcast, a show that explains, highlights, guides and brings awareness about all things SDA in this ever-changing India's world. Debbie, hello, welcome.
Hello, Min.
We have 2 emails from clients who've asked us a bunch of questions, and we thought it'd be nice to go over these bunch of questions, Debbie. So let's go over your inquiry that came in from Lindsay.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'll ask you the question, Debbie, and then you can cover the answers for this one, because you actually wrote the answers by email anyway, so it'll be easier.
Okay.
Question number 1 from Lindsay. In relation to the ongoing costs, is this correct? The estate provider generally charges a fee of 10 to 15% of rent, and that is what a regular property manager does, plus coordinates the carer, etc. It says expect the total ongoing fees to be around 25-30% of the gross rental income. What are these additional 50% costs? Rates and maintenance and insurance, or am I missing something else here?
She is absolutely correct. The additional costs that we estimate, the extra 10 or 15%, are for the rates, insurance and maintenance. And I've actually made a note that it might seem quite a lot, but insurance for an SDA property is somewhat higher than for a regular residential property, because there's actually a business being operated within the premises. So standard residential property insurance does not cover it.
I think it's about $5,500-$6,000 per year for SDA housing insurance. Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you add in there the water rates, $2,500, council rates, $3,500, maintenance, $2,000 a year, 15% being property management fees from the estate provider, that's probably about $18,000-$19,000 there. That all adds up, Debbie.
Yeah. So, that 25 to 30% is a generous estimate to make sure that your overview of what you're potentially going to be paying out is sort of well and truly covered.
Okay. Next question, the number 2. The SA head lease tends to be 20 years, but each time a tenant leaves and a new one comes in, a new placement fee of $3,000 to $10,000 is payable? Do participants generally sign a 12-month lease like a regular residential property? And if so, if they leave after 12 months, then I'll be up for another $3,000 to $10,000? If they leave before the end of the lease, what happens then?
Okay, so I just reiterated to Lindsay firstly that the 20-year period is not necessarily the lease term. It's actually, you hear about the 20 years, that is the period by which the house is classified as a new build SDA and remains certified as a new build SDA property from the time of the first tenant moves in, I believe. Now, head leases with providers, they can be 20 years, but they're generally 5 by 5 by 5 by 5 or 10 by 10. Participants generally sign it, from what we understand, a 2-year standard residential lease. And as a rule, the participant procurement fees that are charged by the SDA provider, I believe, are one-off. That means that if a participant does leave, then you don't pay that fee again. This is, of course, dependent on the arrangement you've got with the SDA provider that you engage. So they'll all have their own particular fees and terms and conditions. Now, on to the question or the point that was raised here about a tenant leaving. Now, we don't expect it's going to be a common thing for a tenant to actually leave their property once they're in residence. It's considered their forever home. Often they've moved in from an aged residential care situation or a hospital bed, or from home where they've lived with aging parents who are no longer able to care for them. So it's very unlikely they're going to be moving around unless the house really doesn't suit their requirements. And that's what makes it really important that you're building a future-proofed property and consider any additional costs that you may need to pay out to make it fit for purpose for the individual tenants. It's going to mean that they are going to stay in there for life. I didn't actually answer in the question if they leave before the end of the lease happens. I guess that's considered a regular lease break, but again, it's up to the SDA property manager or the SDA provider to work on that arrangement with the tenant. But generally, we would see that is going to be an unusual and an unlikely situation for the participants to break their lease or leave.
Now, in saying so, Debbie, never say never.
Of course not.
So let's talk about those times when we can see them actually wanting to leave.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think, Debbie? Under what circumstances does a participant want to actually leave this house?
They have found a better one.
Okay.
They found one in an area that appeals to them more,
Yes.
maybe closer to family, to friends, to work, to the social setup.
That may have been moved into this house prematurely
Mm-hmm.
without fully thinking about there forever.
Yeah, maybe they don't have the right funding
Mm-hmm.
for it. They have maybe had appealed the funding that they were given and got a better result and now want to move into a different home.
They may have personality clashes with the other participants in the house
Or the carers.
or the carers. They may be unhappy with the care service.
Yep. So there certainly are reasons why, but that is, I guess, comes back to the importance of getting the right participants in at the beginning with the right SDA provider who makes sure that they do get the right participants in.
They may be poached by another care provider as well, Debbie.
Yeah.
Okay. So there are a lot of reasons why they may leave the house or the home, but as you said, it is rare.
I think if you think of it from the perspective of moving home, I mean, I know when I'm about to do it myself, moving home is one of the most stressful things that we undertake in our lives. Who likes moving home? No one. And imagine if you are a participant and you have either the emotional or mental or physical challenges that whatever your disability is, I'd imagine that would potentially make moving house a lot more stressful. It's certainly not something that you're going to do in a hurry.
Yeah, exactly. Now, moving on to the next question. What is the point of a 20-year lease if the SDA provider does not have any tenants? Rental income isn't guaranteed for 20 years, is it?
No, rental income isn't guaranteed at all unless you specifically manage to have an agreement with a provider that does offer that, and it would generally be a much lower return. And in most of the cases we've seen, those agreements in fine print still state it's based on tenancy. So there basically is no such thing as a guaranteed income on an SDA property. The 20-year lease or longer leases such as 10 years, from my understanding, are more to give tenants peace of mind that they'll not be kicked out of the home. So if the provider has a 10-year lease, 10 years is up, and the owner maybe decided to get another provider, that would potentially leave the tenant up in limbo. So the tenant is looking for providers that have a 20-year lease on a property. It gives them the security and peace of mind that this is going to be their forever home.
I want to correct the wording of this question. Lindsay is asking the question, what's the point of a 20-year lease? Well, the 20-year management lease is different from a residential lease between the participant and the SDA provider, because the lease isn't between the landlord and the participant, it's between the SDA provider who acts as a proxy on behalf of the landlord, obviously. So you must understand there's two types of leases here. Management lease between the provider and the landlord, and a residential lease between the participant and the provider.
Yeah. That actually goes on to, we'll jump question 4 now and go to question 5 that she actually asks, does the participant sign a lease with me as the owner or is the SDA a lease?
Yep.
So yeah, as Min just said, 2 leases, the head lease or the agreement with the SDA provider. The SDA provider is effectively the property manager, but they will actually hold the individual leases with the tenants.
Yeah. Next question, number 4. Do tenants generally pay a bond, generally a week's rent, and rent in advance, generally 2 weeks, like a regular residential property?
As far as I'm aware, yes, they do pay a bond. I don't know where the 1 week, I know when I pay a bond, it's usually 4 weeks. Rent in advance, 2 weeks. And of course, that would probably be dependent upon the SDA provider's agreement, their property management terms.
I met up with Brendan in his house, his apartment a few weeks ago, and he said he signed a normal residential RTA, or at least lease agreement. Yeah.
With the bond. Now, the bond, if that is to be paid, and the rent in advance, which if it is to be paid, is going to be based not on the SDA income. The SDA income is made up of the SDA funding and the participants' maximum rental,
MRRC.
the reasonable rent contribution, And that's currently $10,912 per annum. So it's made up of 25% of their disability pension and their rental allowance. So the rent would obviously be the bond, and the rent in advance would come out of that amount. But yes, it's based on the relevant state legislation for tenancy agreements and as per the SDA providers' agreements.
If anyone wants to hear or know more about property management topics, please refer to the podcast that Debbie did, episode 2 of 2 with the SDA Consulting Australia group team. It was Karina
and Nicole.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Now, moving on to our second email inquiry from a gentleman by the name of Denham. He says the following: I'm a sophisticated investor and my concerns are around the following points. And Debbie, let me read you out all the questions first, and then we'll go back to them one by one. The estate provider of the participants, tenants, can cease. How do we mitigate through this situation from occurring? How long does the lease period go for? What is the vacancy rate to expect per year? 3 years, 5 years? Can a rental guarantee be established between the estate provider and owner? What is the exit strategy in the event of one occurring? How is the lending finance obtained on NDIS properties? If there is a shortfall in the valuation, how is it handled? So they're the basic questions. A little bit of a twist on different topics here than what our previous email was all about. But let's go to the first one. How long does the lease period go for?
Well,
1 to 2 years.
Yeah, that's the standard tenant lease agreement period, 1 or 2 years. Generally, I think it's 2 years.
Yeah, and there's no use in trying to squeeze any more out of that, because if what are you going to do? You lock them into a 5-year? You can't, because they are allowed to leave with 60 days notice. Okay? If they're allowed to leave with 60 days notice and the government also pays and reimburses the SDA, the landlord, with that money, then you can't touch them, really. Yeah. Moving on, the next question. What is the vacancy rate to expect per year, or 3 years, or 5 years?
Well, I would hope that
this was covered, Debbie, in the SDA price review, July 1, 7.5% per year.
That is the current average vacancy rate,
Yes.
Australia-wide.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, the point is that you would hope to expect zero vacancy rate, because you're going to have, permanent, full tenancy and permanent tenants.
I think the question should have been, Debbie, what is the vacancy rate at the very start of the house be completed to the first tenancy? That is really the question.
Yes. So you would expect it to take 6 to 9 months to get all your tenants in place, 3 months to 6 months for your first tenant.
Next question. Can a rental guarantee be established between the estate provider and the owner?
Basically, no.
Well, yes.
It could be if the provider is willing to give it.
There's not that many providers silly enough to do that.
Yeah.
Well, let's be honest. Would they put themselves at risk financially to promise a rent guarantee to an owner? I tell you what, though, if they were to do that, they'll probably offer you 50 or 60 grand rent. Okay? They would take the 150 themselves and pay you, the landlord, 50 or 60 grand or 70 grand.
Yeah, look, this all comes down to the fact that this is a more risky investment than a regular residential property investment. And you're paid the higher returns to mitigate that risk. But if you're not prepared to take that risk in the first place, then this is potentially not an investment for you.
We have seen not that many guaranteed head leases out there, Debbie.
And as I mentioned in one of the other previous questions from Lindsay, is when we've read the fine print, it's still not a guaranteed head lease. It's only guaranteed if tenants are in residence.
So we've looked at a handful of these out there in the marketplace, and they're not worth the piece of paper they're written on.
Yeah.
And let me tell you something, Denham. If you were to chase someone on a guarantee of rent that they owe you, good luck finding them. Good luck chasing them down in court. Good luck getting the money out of them. Because you know why? they'll probably close up shop and establish themselves as a new brand new company. Right? It's not easy trying to chase people for money. It's not. Yeah, it's very, very hard.
Yeah, so I think, the whole idea around rental guarantee is really just something most people should kind of get over.
I want to say something to everyone listening to this podcast. We've spoken to thousands, not 1,000. I'm talking thousands of people out there about the topic of SDA and guaranteed rents. I've yet to come across one person who is happy with a guaranteed head lease. I've never come across someone. And if you are out there, please email us. Tell us your wonderful story about your guaranteed head lease, because it doesn't exist out there.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you're making 50 grand guaranteed, guess what? Old mate down the road, he's giving you the guarantee. He's making 150,000 himself. Okay. And then you'll be wondering, why am I going to get 50 grand? Because you're the sucker who asked for it.
And generally, those head lease agreements are for a long period of time, whether it's 10 years, 20 years.
And no CPI.
Yeah, they don't change. So in 20 years' time, can you imagine what the CPI increases will have been? And you're still getting 50 grand.
Yep. It's rubbish. And if anyone offers you that,
run away.
Run away. Okay, moving on. Next question is, what is the exit strategy in the event of one occurring? This is being the rental guarantee, by the way. Rental guarantee, is that right, Debbie?
No, I actually think this refers to question 1, which we actually didn't cover. The SDA provider of the participants can cease. How do we mitigate?
Oh, yes.
We didn't actually refer to that. So how do we mitigate the provider? I'm not quite sure what he's referring to. This SDA provider of the participants can cease. Well, not really, because the SDA provider has the agreement with the owner of the property to rent the property.
So you replace the provider, right? If the provider ceases, you replace the provider.
Yeah, so you get a new provider.
Yeah, that's it. Simple.
I mean, I don't know when that would happen. If the provider closes up shop.
There are 1,600 SDA providers around Australia. Okay, I know probably 50 or 40 of them. I don't know. I don't even know how to find 1,000 of them, to be honest. Where are they? No idea. I guess another thing is, Debbie, a lot of it's still providers through the legacy setup of
SDA provider,
because they were just given the SDA license. That's part of their SIL license, even though they're inactive in their SDA provider service. And I see a lot of these big organisations like Aruma, Life Without Barriers, and larger organisations who don't actively operate their SDA provider service because they want to keep arm's length from that between the two. You're either one or the other. It's not good being both, obviously. And I've just seen them refusing to participate in that SDA role. Yeah. Moving on.
Anyway, that's sort of off the case. So what is the exit strategy? Well, yeah, as you just said, you sign up with a new SDA provider. I believe that the certification of the property is done by the SDA provider, so I'm not quite sure how that is affected if the provider...
If a new provider takes over, they have to re-enroll.
They have to re-enroll the property, yeah. Again, yeah. So, but I'd imagine that is a very unlikely situation to happen. Anyway, moving on.
How is the lending finance obtained on NDIS properties?
Is it a commercial loan or a valuation that is required? Or is it a more straightforward residential loan structure? Okay, it's definitely not a straightforward residential loan. It is a commercial loan. Valuation is a part of that.
Commercial valuation, yes.
And there are several specialist lenders that do NDIS loans, very good at it, and the very good valuers involved in the industry. But it is a specialised area and you do have to know who to go to.
So if you look at a piece of paper of a loan approval, it's a mortgage, it's P&I, its interest rates are roughly the same. There's LMI insurance, there's bank fees. In essence, it is a residential loan, yes, but it's been set up in a way whereby it is a commercial valuation based upon commercial formula in working out the income of the asset. So physically, it's a residential loan, but hypothetically, it is a commercial loan set up, yes.
If there is a shortfall in the valuation, how is this shortfall handled in the loan? i.e., do we need to add more capital to make up the shortfall?
The answer is yes. If you're paying a 20% deposit and there's a shortfall of 40, 50 grand, then you can either absorb that in your bigger deposit and end up with a 15% deposit and 85% LVR, so to speak, or you can add more cash into the deal.
Having said that, of late, the valuers and the finance companies that we've been talking to have been saying that the valuations are pretty much always coming in on par.
Yeah. So I reckon 2 years ago, we would have seen a lot of shortfall values of 100 grand or so. But with with time and experience, a lot of the lenders and a lot of the valuers are now valuing out close to the contract price. Close to. I won't say guaranteed all the time, but definitely
Close to. Yeah.
Okay. So last question here is, what are the associated fees that need to be paid out of the income? Well, we've already covered that, haven't we?
We have that in Lindsay's first question. So about 25 to 30%, being around half of that is the SDA provider fee. So they're not just the property manager, they look after or they deal with the care organisations, the still organisations operating in the house. They also manage all the compliance with the NDIS. They collect the income from the NDIS and then bill them, and they have to do all the associated audits as well. So it's a lot more than a regular property manager. And of course, the tenants do generally require a lot more work to manage. So that's about 50% of that, 25 to 30%. And then, of course, the balance is the rates, insurance and maintenance.
Wonderful. I think that covers that session today, Debbie, about these 2 email of questions from these listeners.
Yep, very good questions on leases and income.
Keep them coming in, everyone. If you have anything that's a bit of a curveball, feel free to shoot us these questions or ideas, and we'd be happy to go over them with you on our podcast show. But anyway, I think that covers today's episode, Debbie.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please make sure you are subscribed and following us so you can keep in the loop with all of our upcoming episodes. We would really appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star rating, a written review, and to share this podcast with those that could benefit. Until next time, catch you on the next episode.